In the 1850s, the previous two-party system fell apart. The previous two-party system, you remember, was the Democrats and the Whigs. But the Whigs disintegrated in the 1850s. The Whigs were an unstable coalition, and it was the slavery issue that really tore the party apart. So those people who were Whigs now looked for a new party. Most of them didn't want to become Democrats. That was the party they were opposed to. Two new parties appeared in the 50s, and each one looked like they might become the new second party. The Republicans appeared in the 1850s, a party that really only aimed to be a regional party. The Republicans told voters that if they elected Republicans, Republicans would stop the expansion of slavery. Obviously, that platform is not going to have much appeal with the Southern voting audience. The other party that appeared same time period, early 1850s, mid-1850s, the Know-Nothings. The Know-Nothings were a nativist political party. Nativists disliked immigrants. They called themselves nativists because they called themselves Native Americans. Now, a modern ear hears that and thinks of like Indians. This was never confusing to people in the 1850s because they didn't call those people Native Americans. They called them savages or Indians. So when these white Americans who disliked immigrants called themselves Know-Nothings, when they called themselves nativists, what they meant was, I was born here. I am native to this country, and these immigrants are not. So there were these nativist clubs that sprung up in cities around the country, and then that sort of formed into a political party. It's not entirely clear why they were known as the Know-Nothings. The best explanation is that they, as part of their hating Catholics, said that I know nothing but the Bible. That is to say, I don't take direction from the Pope. I know nothing but the Bible. As they got more into not just city politics, but looking to become a national political party, they were officially known as the American Party, but most people still called them the Know-Nothings. Okay, so we got two new political parties developing, and in Maryland, the Know-Nothings, it would turn out, had more political success than anywhere else in the country. And that's weird on the surface of it, because often we think of the northern cities as being filled with immigrants. But in 1850, check this out, in 1850, Maryland was 13% foreign born. So 13% immigrants. Now, the vast majority of those immigrants in Maryland, as in the rest of the country, were Irish and German. In Maryland, it's somewhere between 80 and 90% of all the immigrants were either Irish or German. But in Baltimore, the foreign-born population was close to 25% of the population. So Baltimore is the key to that big immigrant population in the state of Maryland. It's Baltimore. Baltimore had 3 German language newspapers in the 1850s, all of them actively abolitionist, which is part of why so many native white Marylanders hated the immigrants. So to understand what's about to go down here, let me explain a couple things about elections. Voting in this period was done in public. There's no secret ballot. There's no private voting, no private vote. The polls were a festive atmosphere where lots of people spent the whole day hanging out. You'd go with your friends, you'd see people you hadn't seen in a while, you'd cast your vote, you'd drink. And from the early days of the nation, voting could be physical. Like, because voting was done in public, in some areas that were really contested, it was not uncommon for groups of voters to try to intimidate away a voter who wanted to cast their ballot for the other party. They'd try and stand and block their way. They'd sometimes bump them with their shoulders. But it was considered bad form to, physically attack someone. But you could make it difficult for them. That was commonplace. There was no voter registration, another thing that's important to understand. Instead, each voting place, usually voting places were put at saloons. Don't worry, no trouble here. At each voting place, there was an election judge. And the election judge was given the task of deciding who could vote and who couldn't. Now, in the rural parts of Maryland or the country, these election judges generally know everybody in the community. This was more difficult in a big city like Baltimore. Baltimore was split into 20 voting wards. And in each of those wards, there's an election judge who, as you can see in the picture here, is pretty wasted. Baltimore had experienced corruption when it was governed by Democrats. In the Democrats versus Whigs period, the Democrats were the more corrupt of the two parties, and the Whigs, the party more likely to advocate for law and order, for clean government. So in 1854, the Whigs are gone, and this new political party, the Know-Nothings, is competing against the Democrats for control of the Baltimore city government. Running candidates for city council and Samuel Hinks for mayor of Baltimore. The Know-Nothings were angry at the Catholics, at all the immigrants, angry, they said, at the prominence of Jews in Baltimore. But they also promised to clean up corruption. If, like the nerd I know you are, you pause the video and read through the Know-Nothing political campaign flyer over here, you can see that they're promising we're going to clean up Baltimore's corruption. Vote Samuel Hinks. Okay, we'll see. This is a Know-Nothing depiction of the problem. Here's the Irish immigrant as a barrel of whiskey, and the German immigrant as a keg of beer, and together they run away with the ballot box. Know-Nothings could blame every societal problem on immigrants. And if immigrants couldn't get the job done to blame that problem on, they were willing to also use black people. Don't get the wrong idea. They were not like pro-black people people because they were born here. Nice try. So Hinks wins the mayorship of Baltimore, and Know-Nothings took control of the city council. And now, the Know-Nothings, who remember had criticized corruption, dramatically escalated Baltimore's corruption. The Democrats had used this election tactic known as cooping, where, again, you can pause and read the article that I've included here. The Democrats had started this. They would kidnap people in the days before the election. They'd kidnap them, keep them in these row houses in Baltimore that were connected like by subterranean like tunnels connecting the houses, and they kept them under armed guard for days before the election, and they would drug them and force them into incredible drunkenness. If people tried to escape, they beat them, and they basically got people all whacked out days before the election, and then on election day brought them out to vote under guard. So, like, you know, they bring you to vote with like 4 guys surrounding you, and you're all wasted, and the election judge doesn't seem to care. So they sort of force you to vote Democratic. Not sort of. Force you to vote Democratic. They got people whacked out on opium and all kinds of stuff. And so this cooping tactic had been in place. In fact, it appears that cooping is what had killed Edgar Allan Poe. Back in 1849, when the Democrats still ran the city, Poe was found dead on the streets, or almost dead. He died soon after, right after an election. And it appears that the Democrats had snagged him from a bar, which is where they got most of their victims. He was found near a polling place. He was like 40 years old. Poe had serious alcohol problems. But it appears that the death may have been the fault of Baltimore politics. Now, other people were killed in the practice of cooping, but Poe was a famous author. Well, now, the Know-Nothings, in control of the city, they didn't stop with cooping, although they did continue to use cooping against their Democratic rivals. The Know-Nothings empowered gangs. Well, they didn't call them gangs because that sounds bad. They called them political clubs. But they were gangs. Political clubs in each of the wards across the city. The political clubs are really just gangs, and so that's what I'm going to call them, even though the Know-Nothings insist that they're like legitimate. It's just groups of people getting together with their political views. They were violent and they were criminal. The Know-Nothing gangs included, most importantly, the Plug Uglies and the Blood Tubs, who will talk more about each of those. But also the Rednecks, the Rip Raps, the Rough Skins, the Tigers, the Wampanoags. The Democrats responded by creating political clubs of their own, which are, in effect, rival gangs. The Democrats had, most importantly, the Bloody Eighths, the Irish gang in the 8th voting ward. So the Democrats create rival gangs to compete. The Bloody Eighths the blackguards, the double pumps, the Calathumpians, the ferry road hunters, the peelers, the pluckers, the butt enders. By 1855 and 56, Baltimore was awash in these political gangs. And in the next election, 1855, the Know-Nothings put their gangs into action and secured a victory through violence. You can see in the newspaper article over here how they are triumphing over republicanism, Whiggism, and abolition thisism, which I'll leave you to read. And in Maryland, the stronghold of patriotism and love of country, our victory is thrice glorious. Maryland was where the Know-Nothings were having their greatest success, and they were doing it with this kind of political violence.